Hello and welcome back to another episode of Stories. Are you somebody who's interested in the history of New York, especially the street names and building names? Well, my next guest wrote a book all about that and how they got the names. So sit back, relax, and grab your favorite beverage and let's learn more about her. See you there.
I wanna believe in the truth, but only see what I'm shown. Got the freedom to choose, but can't decide on my own. Follow what the group is thinking, bottle up my
Hello and welcome back to another edition of Stories. Today I'm talking with Rebecca Brassese. Welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a New Yorker. I'm a law professor. I teach at City University School of Law. And the main reason we're talking today is because, in addition to being a law professor, I also sort of cosplay as a historian. And I recently wrote a book about New York City history using the names that we give things as a way into like various eras of the city's history.
Now, what pulled you into becoming a historian? I mean, that's an interesting thing altogether. Is law is one thing, but all of a sudden to get fascinated into the history, what was that initial pull?
Well, as I was telling you before we started recording, as a law professor, I'm always trying to give my students context. I'm always trying to
Mhm.
help them understand how a particular case wound up in court, how a particular law was adopted, and to put it into the social, political, and economic context of the era. And to be honest, in terms of how I wound up doing a project about New York City history, is I used to get stuck in traffic all the time on a
Mhm.
road called the Major Deegan Expressway. And the road goes by Yankee Stadium to the George Washington Bridge. And of course, everybody knows who George Washington is, but nobody had a clue who Major Deegan was, even though this super major road is named after him. And so I used to be stuck in traffic on the Major Deegan Expressway. And when I wasn't cursing, I was saying, "Who is this guy? I hate him." And my family got a little sick of hearing me say that. So they said, "Well, why don't you find out who the guy was?" And so I did. And it turned out that he was way less impressive than you might expect, given that he has this major road named after him. I assumed he had like died in battle or done something impressive. But he was a mid-level bureaucrat. He was a major. He had served in the Army Corps of Engineers during World War One in New York. So he never, even though it was the American Expeditionary Force, he didn't go on any expeditions. He stayed in New York and did work that mattered, but wasn't particularly notable in any fashion. And then he became a bureaucrat in New York City, where again, he did work that mattered, but wasn't particularly notable. And yet, this road was named after him. So it made me wonder, first of all, why? And then, second of all, who are all the other people that we have roads and bridges and things named after?
Mhm.
And were they impressive or not?
I mean, it's kind of like my father, who loved history in so many ways. He was fascinated about our own airport, O'Hare, and he wanted to
Mm-hmm.
know who it was named after. It was named after Bucky O'Hare, who was, I think, a World War One or World War Two Air Force veteran who flew missions. And so
Yeah,
they named it after him. And then you just go down that rabbit hole of, oh, wow, this is named after this person, this is named after that person. And it just kind of blows your mind.
exactly. And I bet that of the people listening to us, almost none of them have ever asked themselves, well, why is O'Hare Airport called O'Hare Airport? Is it named after someone named O'Hare?
I
Same kind
mean,
of thing in New York.
yeah, I mean, people don't think about why the name is named, why a building is named after this person, why a street's named after that person.
Yeah.
Why does this person get an honorary mention of a street name? I mean, you walk down the city's streets of Chicago and downtown, you'll come across honorary mention streets.
Mhm.
Even here where I live, you'll see a street named after a person, and you're figuring, why did that person get that honorary mention?
Yeah, well, there are two different layers of that. There's the name that's in the official street grid,
Mhm.
and then there are honorary namings. And honorary namings are like on the corner, you'll see like a street sign often in a different color that says this corner is, like I was just in a part of Queens and it was Geraldine Ferraro Way is one block of a street called Austin Street. Now,
Hmm.
Geraldine Ferraro was a really important congressional representative from New York, and she was the Walter Mondale's running mate in 1984, and is a really important figure. But that's an honorary naming, which doesn't change the street grid of the city. So it's much easier to have an honorary naming. It requires, here in New York, it requires a petition from local residents to name something after somebody, and they have to have a certain number of signatures and then a rationale. And once they have
Hmm.
they meet those standards, it goes to city council. And city council sort of groups all of them. They do a cursory check to make sure there's nothing problematic. And I don't know what that would be, but I know they do a check to make sure there's nothing problematic. And then they approve them in a batch. So because they're not changing the street grid, they don't have to change the maps or anything. So it's a much easier process. To change the name of a street on the street grid, that's a big production. That doesn't happen very often.
No, that I understand because if you were to change an actual name, that means you gotta change it on maps, you gotta change it on
Mhm.
Google, and everything else that goes along with it. And that's
Mhm.
just confusing.
Yeah, so in Brooklyn, there's a street named I mentioned, sorry, I'm going to jump back for a second. I mentioned that this one part of Austin Street in Queens was named and had an honorary name after Geraldine Ferraro. Well, Austin is actually the first name of a guy named Austin Corbin. And he was a robber baron, really rich guy at the turn of the last century. And he was awful. I mean, he was a villain by so many different measures. He was anti Semitic, he was xenophobic, he was a union buster, he was all kinds of bad things. But anyway, he was also really rich. So Austin Street was named after him, and a street called Corbin Street was also named after him in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is one of the areas that he had a lot of action. He helped develop Coney Island
Mm.
after essentially stealing the land from the landowners. He had this really shady real estate deal where he managed to get their land for like pennies on the dollar. But the neighborhood in Brooklyn didn't want to be named after Austin Corbin anymore because it had become a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, and they were really upset about having the street named after this raging anti-Semite. But they also didn't want to go through the expense and hassle of officially changing the name. So what they did was they had a public ceremony and they officially changed who the street was named after. It's now named after a woman named Elizabeth Corbin, who was part of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. And in fact, she was the first woman to receive a military pension from the United States government. So, there are all kinds of ways to finesse these naming questions.
I mean, I'm guessing this is why you dove into your in writing this book. Why would someone want to name a street after somebody who is so vile and so negative? In
Mhm.
my feeling, it's probably because of money. He was rich, he was a baron, he had the money.
And who gets to make those decisions, right? It's, who gets to tell the story? Everybody thinks they're the center of the story because that's the nature of being human. But when the people who get to make the decisions are a bunch of really rich white robber baron men, they think it's perfectly appropriate to name a street after a rich robber baron man, even though he's a vile human being. When it's a much wider group of people making the decision, you find it's a little more nuanced, I think.
I mean, it's weird you think about it because, but if you, in a way, back in the day, it was a man's world. It was money, 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 money. Everything was a man's club. So anyone who had money had influence.
Well, women couldn't legally married women couldn't legally own property in the United States until the 1850s. And of course, we considered Black people not to be people, but to be property until the end of the Civil War. So, who got to name things? You have to start with like, who got to be a person? And that was like the first cut. And then after who got to be recognized as a person under our laws, then you had who had power and influence. So it was a very much a small subset of the population that had power to do these things until the much more recent history.
Now, where did you start? What was your writing process when you wrote your book? Who did you start with, and how did you
Mm.
decide on that?
Well, like I said, I started with Major Deegan because I got stuck on the Major Deegan Expressway all the time. And I used there like aren't books written about Major Deegan. He's not a significant historical figure in that sense.
Mhm,
So I used a lot of newspaper articles, and newspapers were a lot more like, say, People magazine back at the beginning of the 20th century, and there were a lot of them. And now we have like a couple newspapers of record, but in New York there were probably 30 newspapers in English, right? Let alone in all of the other languages, but in English in the 19s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. So there's this wealth of information about the lives and foibles of government officials and people in
mhm.
power. And so I just had a great time digging into that and tracking things down.
Now, where did you decide to end, and how did you decide who to end on? Because I'm pretty sure you could have just kept writing forever because there were so many buildings and street names named after different people. How did you decide to end on how
I
did
ran
you
out.
decide to end, and who did you decide to end on?
Okay, so I ran out of space.
Mm,
So I'm an academic, and when you work with an academic publisher, you start off and you pitch, I'm going to write a book. It's going to be 70,000 words on topic, whatever. And then as you write, you realize, oh, that's nowhere near enough words. And so you write something that's maybe 140,000 words and you give it to them and they say, okay, thank you. But when you work with a commercial press that writes for popular audiences, they give you a word limit and they actually mean it. So, if the word limit is 60,000 words, you can't give them 65,000 words even. You have to really stick to it. So, I had people I had to cut out of the book because I ran out of space. And I wrote some blog posts that are available online and they're on my website also. If people want to just check out the free stuff, go ahead. It's there. I want to share that information. Um, and so there are lots of people that I would have written about if this book could have been, twice as big or three times as big. But there are limits, I guess.
Now you did something different. You went from history to writing a comic book, the Environmental Justice Chronicles.
Mhm.
How did you go fiction, from nonfiction to comics? I mean, that's a whole jump.
Well, I've been making the comic books for, oh gosh, how long? 15 years maybe. I work very closely with a super talented artist, a guy named Charlie LaGreca, and he and I have this collaboration that has really grown over the years making these comic books. And those are actually tied more to my day job as a law professor
Mhm.
because environmental law is my specialty, and I particularly focus on environmental justice, which is the way that people do or do not have clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. So these comic books are an attempt to take my scholarship, which is pretty dense and probably not of interest to people who aren't scholars, and to turn it into something that's much more accessible and much more fun, quite frankly.
All right. Now we get to the part of the show where everyone loves to hear the question. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
All right. What motivates you, inspires you, drives you?
Well, I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and Bethlehem, Pennsylvania was a steel town at the time.
Mhm.
And the levels of air pollution and water pollution in the town that I grew up with are pretty staggering. Most of the center of the town is a Superfund site because it is so contaminated. And what I saw as a kid was a couple of things. One, I saw that if you were white and male, you were more likely to get a good job at the steel plant. And if you were a person of color or a woman, you couldn't get those jobs. And I also saw that the pollution was all directed into neighborhoods that were socioeconomically stressed. And it was that inequality between who had opportunity and who didn't, and who got clean air and who didn't, that really drives the work that I do now to try to make sure that everybody has opportunity and clean air and clean water.
Well, what's the best compliment you've ever gotten?
Huh. Um, that's hard. I just gave a talk in Kansas City, and afterwards, a high school student wrote to me and said, I just want you to know that what you said was really inspiring. And sometimes people think I'm a little weird because I care so much about these issues, but thank you for making me feel like these concerns are normal. And, I think that's one of the best compliments I ever got. I mean, a high school kid felt strongly enough to email a
Mhm.
stranger and share that information.
I mean, that must mean a lot,
Yeah.
especially that you've touched somebody in the high school level.
Yeah. Like that's what it's all about, right? Is,
Mhm.
making space for people to say what they want to say and to be who they want to be, and change the world for the better.
I mean, it reminds me of a story. I mean, when I first started out podcasting,
Hmm.
I would post my stuff up on my blog. And one day I get a message from this kid saying, "Hi, my name is so and so. I'm writing to you, one, because I've got stage 4 colon cancer, but I'm not writing to you about myself. I'm writing to you about my sister who's autistic because my father and my family are not letting her see the outside world. Or overprotective. Because of your podcast, I'm going to talk to them and explain to them that she needs to see the world."
Well, that's fantastic.
And that just hit me right here, just like that compliment you got from that high school kid hit you right in the heart.
Yeah, like that's amazing. You changed this kid's world
Hmm.
in a way that is going to let her experience, the wider world and be the fullest and most incredible person she can be.
Hmm. Now, what is your biggest failure and what did you learn from that experience?
I'm sorry, could you just say that again?
What is your biggest failure and
Okay.
what did you learn from that experience?
Oh, there are lots of those. Um, I had the tremendous opportunity to be a Loose Foundation fellow in Taiwan in the early 90s. And it was an incredible opportunity. They sent me to Taiwan to work with the Environmental Protection Administration there. And when I got there, it turned out that the Environmental Protection Administration really had nothing for me to do. And they just sort of were like, go have fun, do things. And I was a little too young to be able to chart my own course the way that I could have. Like if I went there now and they said, oh, we don't have anything for you to do, I have a list of things and I could do all kinds of really cool things. But I didn't do as nearly as much as I could and should have with that opportunity. I learned Chinese, so that was, I feel like that was an accomplishment in and of itself. But I could and should have learned a lot more about the unique problems in Taiwan and how much they were embedded in the colonial history with Japan and also the tensions with China, and in a way that would let me bring that to my work now. Like I learned a lot about what was going on there, but not in a way that lets me really use it, and that to me is a shame. So don't waste opportunities, and um think about what you can learn from whatever situation you're in, even if it isn't the situation you thought you were going to be in, is I think what I learned from that.
Yeah. Tell me about three influential people in your life and how they impacted you.
So let's see. Start, I'm going to go backwards in time. I'm going to start with one of my colleagues or my former colleagues at the City University of New York. Her name is Penelope Andrews, and she now teaches at another law school. And she is South African and was part of the anti-apartheid movement. And What I really learned from her, she brings this incredible moral clarity to everything that she does. And she is not afraid of anybody. She will speak her mind and stand up for what's right. And I try to model that in my own behavior, but she's really inspired me to do that. And when I was in law school, I had a professor, a woman named Lonnie Guinier. I went to the University of Pennsylvania and she was teaching then, and then she taught at Harvard afterwards. But President Clinton nominated her to be head of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. And there was this vicious press campaign against her. And it was dehumanizing. It was really upsetting. And people trying to support her had no way to break in. Like a lot of her students rallied and were trying to sort of counter some of the narratives, and we couldn't. And I remember at one point she said to me, "You can't expect things to be fair, right? People are going to do things that are mean and unfair, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't. So don't waste your time trying to fight everything. Pick the battle." So she's like, "I'm not the battle worth picking. Civil rights is the battle worth picking." So, that also to me was really impressive. She was such an inspiring woman. I took every class that she offered, and she really shaped my law career. I met her in my early 20s, and she taught me so much. And then I probably would say my parents, for I'm going to cheat and have two people as my third person. My parents are really committed to community. They're deeply involved in every community they've ever been in. All of my friends, my brother and sister's friends, called my parents mom and dad, and they were like mom and dad to the world. They were just and are still the center of the family and a wider community. And I try to model that as well.
Right. What makes you feel inspired or like your best self?
Nature. Even though I live in New York City, I have the great good fortune that I live in a housing co-op that is an old tower in the park style, which means that there are high-rise buildings and a park around them. And so when I look out my window, I see trees and I hear birds, even though I'm in New York City. And just looking at the trees helps me breathe.
Mhm.
And going on a hike into the woods, going to a waterfall, diving, going underwater, and just appreciating the beauty of a coral reef. All of that centers me and inspires me, and is again part of why I do the work that I do.
Right. Finish the sentence. I am at my best when.
I am at my best when I have something exciting to do, when I have something that I care about, that I feel like I can do, that I feel like matters, or when I'm diving.
If you can turn back time and
Mhm,
talk to your 18-year-old self,
mhm.
what would you tell her about where you are now in life?
My 18-year-old self would be staggered, could not begin to imagine the life that I have led. And there were all those videos a while ago of queer adults making videos saying it gets better, sending messages to, queer kids and transgender kids. And I would say that to myself as well. I would say it gets better because when you're 18, you're like a walking nerve ending, and things matter so much, and not necessarily things that should. So I think I would say it gets better, and the world is big and wide, and don't be afraid because you're going to do really cool stuff.
I mean, that is so true. When you are
Yeah.
18, everything just feels like you're walking in pins and needles because you don't know what to expect from the world and
Yeah.
what it's expecting from you.
And you think everybody's watching you all the time.
Yeah.
One day, I have a kid who's 18, and one day a couple years ago, we were sorry about the sirens in the background if you can hear them. Um, New York City. One day we were in a cafe on the street, and this woman walked down the street wearing an American flag as a skirt with a scarlet macaw on her shoulder. And Nobody was paying the slightest bit of attention. And I pointed it out to my kid. I'm like, look at that. Remember that. No, if people are not watching the woman with a scarlet macaw on her shoulder, they are not watching you.
I mean, only in America you'll find stuff like that.
And just nobody, especially in a place like New York, like,
Hmm.
everybody's busy. Nobody's in your business. Nobody cares. You can just be you, and the world is not watching you with censorious eyes.
Now, if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would
Mhm.
it be and why?
It would say that everyone has the right to breathe clean air, because what I'm seeing right now in the world is really very scary and depressing in terms of commitment to protecting the environment. And I think when I think about how many kids have asthma
Hmm.
and how intimately that is related to breathing polluted air, it just breaks my heart.
Now, what do you think the world will look like in 5 years from now?
What do I hope or what do I fear?
What do you feel it would look like in 5 years from now?
Um, Well, I'm really concerned that we're gonna be seeing a lot of really very violent weather as our climate change escalates. I hope that people are going to be sort of coming together and recognizing that what we have in common is so much more important than what divides us, and that we need to care about each other and kids. But I am not super confident that that's going to happen. Trying to make it happen, doing my part.
Now, what was your favorite subject in school?
Biology. I loved biology. In fact, I was a biology major in college, and before I went to law school, I was in grad school doing genetic research.
Now, would you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert or an ambivert?
I am, if there's such a thing as an extroverted introvert, that's where I
That's
am.
that's
Is that
what
what an
an
ambivert
ambivert.
is?
That's what an
Yeah.
ambivert is. That means you're a little bit of both.
Yeah, I am yeah, I'm definitely both. I enjoy being with people, but I enjoy being with people that I know and like much more than with strangers. And I can get very introverted in a big crowd. Unless I have a like clear reason. Like if I'm the professor, I'm
Mhm.
super extroverted. If I'm like on a panel and I'm there for a reason, I'm super extroverted. But if I'm like at a party, ooh, yeah.
Now, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be and why?
Well, I think what I will be remembered for is the comic books we were talking about, the Environmental Justice Chronicles. It was when I made them, and we're still making them, but when we started it, it was really groundbreaking. And it was the idea that young people have voices that matter and we should be listening to them is not something I made up, but it is something that the Environmental Justice Chronicles helped facilitate and promote.
Now, tell me about where you are now in life.
I am actually, I can tell you this because it's now public. So as I started, I said I'm a professor at CUNY School of Law. In But I actually just took a new job, and in January I'm going to be moving to New Orleans to be the Oliver Hoke Endowed Professor at Tulane University. And that's a huge honor. Oliver Hoke is one of the sort of visionary founders of environmental law, and to have a chair named after him is such a thrill. And I'll be starting, I'm a little old to be starting this new adventure, but we're moving to a whole new city and a whole new state and a new university and doing things.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What your son think about the whole move?
Well, his attitude is, I'm going to college, you do you. So he did ask me the other day, so where am I going to go for school holidays? And I said, well, we'll have to figure that out.
Now we get to the other questions.
Mm.
What is your favorite word?
Oh, that changes a lot. So that one is tough. Right now, I'm doing this project about the Clean Water Act, and so the word eutrophication is a word that I'm really enjoying. I mean, it's not a good thing to happen in the world, but I like the word and I like saying it.
What's your least favorite word?
Moist. Ugh, I just hate that word.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Um, People who say yes and right. If you're into improv, that's a technique, and it's a good metaphor for life as well. Like there are people who are just naysayers, they want to shoot you down. But then there are people you say, "Hey, I got an idea." And they say, "Yeah, that's great. And we could." And they like add to it and build to it. And I think that's that's what I do with the comic book artist I was telling you about.
Mhm.
And that to me is so exciting.
What turns you off?
People who would rather sit on the sidelines and throw stones rather than do anything.
All right. What is your favorite curse word?
Which one do I use the most? Or I have been known to drop the F-bomb on more than one occasion.
All right. What sound or noise do you love?
The rain on the roof. I love the sound of a good rainstorm.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Oh, fingernails on a chalkboard. Can't stand that squeaking.
What is your favorite color?
Yellow.
What is your least favorite color?
I don't really have a least favorite color. But like the sort of browny orangey colors are not my favorite.
All right. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Oh, so many. Like I got a list. Dive instructor would be a really cool job. Can't say rock star because I can't carry a tune to save my life. In another world, I might have been a research scientist. I don't know. There's so many things I'm interested in.
What profession would you not like to do?
I would not like to be a doctor.
All right. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you reach the pearly gates?
Uh, you did good.
When you arrive at heaven, who would you like to meet?
So these are things I have not thought about because I don't know that I believe in that. But Eric, Harriet Tubman is somebody that I who fascinates me, who I would love to meet.
And finally, where can people find out more about you and your book and your comic book?
I have a website. It's my name, RebeccaBratsby's.com. And the comic books are there for free download. They can be used. I mean, you could read them for anything and you can use them for any educational or nonprofit use. Feel free to make use of them. And you can find out more about the book and about my scholarship and whatever else there is to know about me, I guess.
And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Reed Miles, and that was Rebecca Brassese. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.